All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for today's college preparation series session on the value of a degree. This session is being recorded, so you'll receive a copy of the recording as well as the PowerPoint and everything within about a day after this is done. So first, I'm going to just have you go into some breakout rooms for just a second. And just do some introductions, just get to chat with some other fellow educators and just share, your name, school, role, and why did you choose to pursue post-secondary education? What was kind of like your driving force with that? So I'm going to go ahead and oops, didn't mean to do that, but let me open up some breakout rooms here. We'll do and I'll give you about 5 minutes, so about 1 minute per person to be able to share real quick, and then we'll have you come back. So again, just sharing who you are and why did you choose to pursue post-secondary education? All right, welcome back. I'd love to have just a couple people share in just a few brief words in the chat maybe. What were some of those primary motivators? Why did you choose to pursue post-secondary education? Anyone want to share a couple things in the chat? Yes, you will get sketches for today. There is a sketch code somewhere in the middle that I'll have you fill out, but we also use the Zoom data. So if you're here on the live Zoom, this will also be recorded and shared after for people to get sketches. But we will use the Zoom data for this live, and then there's also a sketch code. But anyone want to share, why did you choose to pursue post-secondary? Yeah, father is public educator, stress the importance. Yeah, definitely a lot of, I think especially a certain generation, a lot of parental pressure to pursue post-secondary education. It was kind of that way or the highway. A lot of societal pressure on it. Yep, gaining independence, going to a different place. A lot of first gen, absolutely. Yeah, needed for career path. Okay, you're really hitting kind of the big main points I wanted to make today. Um, So yes, as we go through today, so we're going to be talking about, obviously the value of a college degree and kind of like the return on investment of it for students. But it's also important to keep in mind that different students want to pursue post-secondary education for different reasons. For some, it is, parents or family or society telling them that they have to for whatever reason. For some, it's that desire to gain independence and to experience something new, and it's more about the whole experience. And for some, it's needed for their specific career path. You cannot be a teacher if you don't go get some form of post-secondary education. And so generally when I talk about post-secondary education, I'm referring to, four-year college, two-year college, and also, training programs, apprenticeships, that kind of stuff. Today, we're really honing in on, especially the four-year, but also the two-year college, um, since that is the area that is getting the most attention in terms of maybe not needing it as much anymore. Um, okay, so another quick poll here, and again, you can just kind of throw some answers in the chat. What question do students ask the most about the value of college? What are some of the things you're hearing from them that they question about if they should go or not? Yes, will I be able to afford it? Which goes along with the comment before about socioeconomic status. making it difficult to pursue? Is there a return on investment? Absolutely. Is it worth it? Time and money. Yeah, I never thought I could. Why should I? I can make money now. Absolutely. So yeah, a lot of students are asking things like, is it worth the cost? Is it worth the time? What if they are going to go? They want to know what major makes the most money? How can I make money after I leave college? Do I really need a degree? I can just go get a job right now and start making money. Is it really necessary? And again, every student has a different reason for wanting to or not wanting to pursue post-secondary education. And so just important to keep those thoughts in mind as well. All right, I'm sure you have all seen some type of chart like this before. It is not my favorite. I will be very transparent. We obviously know that not all jobs equal the same salary, right? If you're working in education, you having a bachelor's or master's degree is not going to be the same as someone who's working in tech or engineering, right? Like we know that different jobs are going to look different salary wise, even with the same education level. But we do know that also over time, the average person will earn more with the more education that they have. And that the unemployment and underemployment, so people who are in jobs that don't require the degree they have, the unemployment rate goes down the more education that someone has. This is usually the first thing people share when they're talking about return on investment is they say, oh, well, the more education you have, the more money you make. Yes, theoretically, but we also know that there are skilled trades and things that people can make a ton of money. People can make a ton of money being content creators, right? That don't necessarily require degrees. So we know that there are exceptions to that. But in general, on average, more education is more money. So when I send you the PowerPoint after, you'll get access to the slides and you'll have the links, all of these links that I'm about to share. Um, But, when we think about today's post-secondary landscape, we know that students today are much more aware of the cost of college. So not only the actual cost of tuition, fees, housing, but also what that looks like in terms of debt and wanting to stay out of debt. So if you click on this link when I send you the slides, you'll see the source from this, and it actually has a couple of different like interactive um, charts that you can look at, including this one. And so this is just for average tuition and fees. So this doesn't include the housing, room and board, that kind of cost. And so it shows even just over the last, the data only goes to 2022, but you can see over the last, 22 years, that increase. So this top line is for private four-year colleges. This red line down here is for public four-year colleges. And then this dotted red line is for public two-year colleges. This dotted red line does not account for obviously our recent community college guarantee. So that, of course, will look a little bit different for students now. But when you look at the interactive map, you see that community college has stayed pretty consistent. It raised from about 2,200 to, on average 3,600 over that time. But both the public four-year and the public four-year and private four-year have nearly doubled in that time. Private is not quite double, but the public has nearly doubled in just the last 22 years. And again, that's just for tuition and fees. I thought this is a really interesting look too. Again, we know that students are more aware of student debt. And again, there's definitely a generation where we were told just to go to school, you'll figure it out later, you'll be able to pay it off, especially working in education. There's public loan forgiveness. But one really interesting thing is that, and this is over just, 14 years, we know that the funding for education has shifted drastically over the last several decades. So, especially for our public institutions, funding used to come primarily from the state and then was subsidized by student tuition, fees, room and board. That has completely flipped over the last several decades. So now most money for institutions are coming from student fees, student tuition, room and board. And so another interesting thing to note here, though, is that while that is happening, we're also seeing students able to access less in federal loans. And we're probably expecting maybe a shift in that even in the next year as they're considering some additional caps on student loans. So you can see that student loan debt annual growth has actually decreased for federal loans, but has increased. I mean, it's kind of up and down, but has generally increased for private loans. And we know that private loans tend to have higher interest rates, not as good of return, uh, policies for students, or repayment policies. So that's a little bit concerning. And we know that students are hearing this and seeing this, and they're getting really concerned about the cost of college, especially, they're having to fill that gap somehow. And so they're trying to figure out how they can do that. I looked and, the institution that I attended, I remember I got, the top scholarship other than like a full ride, which at the time was $24,000. And just the tuition, or not the tuition, room and board was $30,000 my first year. So I only had a gap of $6,000, and I got federal loans, I had Pell Grant, all of the things, right? At that same institution, that top scholarship is now worth 34,000. So it's increased 10,000, but the overall cost has increased $40,000. So that institution that was $30,000 in 2009 is now $70,000. And the scholarship has only increased 10,000. And that's a private institution, but that's not an anomaly. We're seeing a very similar trend at public institutions where the rate of scholarships and things offered to students is not matching the rate that tuition and room and board is increasing. So again, we know our students are hearing this, they're seeing it when they get their financial aid package. It's not looking the best, right? So again, we are trying to help them understand how and when college might be a good return on investment for them. I promise this isn't all doom and gloom. So we also know that more and more schools, like secondary schools, are offering more pathway options than ever for students. So more and more schools are offering dual enrollment, AP classes, early middle college, tech classes or CTE classes where they can earn credentials and certifications. So students are seeing more pathways to not only get done with college faster, but also to get on the job faster with those credentials and certifications. We also know that employers are emphasizing skills and credentials, sometimes over degrees, especially in some fields like the tech field. We're seeing some that are not necessarily caring about a degree. And then we also see students get frustrated when they're in college because there are a number of employers that say they're just looking for anyone with any bachelor's degree, regardless of major. So it feels like it's not a good use of time to go to school, invest in this major, to get a job that anyone could get regardless of major. And as mentioned before, we know that students are seeking a faster ROI. They know that they can go out and get money now, and not have to be in debt. And so they want to start making money. However, we also know that 71% of employers are still requiring a 2 or 4 year degree for entry-level roles. And again, we know that some of them are just saying any degree, and that's kind of frustrating, but it's still the fact. 30% of 2025 graduates have secured full-time jobs related to their degree. 26% of 2025 grads are employed in fields unrelated to their degree. And 33% of 2025 grads from this report are unemployed or underemployed. And so underemployed is, someone who completes college, has that 4 year bachelor's, and then is going back and working as a barista or in a job that doesn't require a 4 year degree. And we know that the longer that someone spends in that underemployed state without ever going to a job that does require a degree, the more likely they are to stay in that underemployed state. All right, now I want to show you an example of what I mean when I'm talking about these different pathways. So this is an example. Let's say a student comes to you and says that they want to be a nurse. We know kind of the traditional route to becoming a nurse is that they go to high school, They go to a 4-year college, they get a bachelor's degree, and they become an RN. We also know that there are a lot of 2-year colleges that have, an associate's that they can get, and they can also become a nurse. For a long time, there used to be more of a distinction between the nursing degrees from a 4-year and 2-year, but we're starting to see that they are fairly similar routes now. This next one is going to look a little crazy, but just know that there are so many different pathways that students can take. Sometimes we hear from students, should I go to KCTC? Should I take AP this? Should I do that? Should I, what way is the best to do this? And really the answer is that there's no best way to do it. Students can approach this from so many different ways. And we're going to go through a case study in a little bit to talk a little bit more in detail about this example. But just kind of keep this in mind. Again, students can go that traditional route where they go, high school, 4-year bachelor's degree to an RN. They could also do KCTC, go work for a bit, come back, lots of different ways that they can approach this. And we know that, again, more and more schools are offering different opportunities. For those who are not from West Michigan, sorry, KCTC is our technical center, our CTE programs. But we know that schools are offering more and more ways for students to get these opportunities and get credit that might not necessarily be the 4-year route. So when we're helping students define ROI, we're really looking at kind of 4 big things. The one that most comes to mind is cost, right? Again, they want to know, why should I go into debt if I can just go make money right now? So obviously cost is a big factor to them. But we also need to consider things like time to completion. And I'm going to show some examples of that in just a second. But thinking about especially the school that they want to go to, how many of their students actually graduate? How many students in that program graduate? Or if they need a specific, credential or to pass a certain test, what does that pass rate actually look like? And then we're going to talk a little bit more about labor statistics. So the employment likelihood, the earnings trajectory, all of that stuff. Again, we know that ROI is more than salary. So part of it is the financial return. So, I'm investing this much into my education. Am I going to get that much, to be able to repay it? But we also know that it's about career mobility. So if they don't go to college, will they be able to get to the level that they're hoping to get to? Will they be able to advance in their career if they don't have a degree? Job stability, learning those transferable skills, and then also personal fit. So we know that people who pursue jobs that have a high salary, but it's a low fit for them, so they're making a lot of money, but they're not very happy doing it, it's not something that they enjoy, actually has poor long-term outcomes in a lot of different ways. Some of that could be persistence. They might do it for a while and get completely burned out and then have to restart. For some, it might cause, some mental health issues, just being unhappy in what they're doing. Some people, money is the main factor, the main motivating factor, and for them, it works out. But for a lot of people, we're trying to look at that fit as well as salary. So what ROI factor do students most often overlook? And it could be things on this list, it could be other things, but any thoughts you want to throw in the chat? Yeah, financial return, location of job, relocating for a job. Yes, long-term benefits and retirement, absolutely. Personal fit. Yeah, some others that I see often are the time to completion um, and dropout risk. So again, we know that students that are not in a good fit, whether that is that they're going to a school that's not a good fit because they think it's going to, be done faster or whatever, they actually, if it's not a good fit, they actually have a higher likelihood of not persisting. So the dropout risk is higher. And then also that underemployment. Yeah, absolutely. Continuing education, development. Sometimes we have students who say, I'm just going to take a year or two off work and then go back. We know that that's harder for students unless they're really highly motivated to go back. For some, it's just the kick that they need to go and pursue whatever they really wanted to do. But for some, again, it can keep them feeling stuck in something that they might not be as happy with. Okay, for those who do want to fill out, again, we're using Zoom attendance, but if you really want to fill out this form to feel like you did it, you can go ahead. Here's our random sketch code insert here. So I'll leave this up for just a second. There's a place that it asks you for the course, so that it'll be the number 3 value of college, and then the sketch code is 502. So I'll leave this up for just a second for a little intermission. Let me I'll pull up that link for you as well. Hold on. Okay, I'm putting that link in the chat as well. So that is the link for the sketch code or the sketch form. And again, the code is 502. All right, I'll throw it up again at the end just in case anyone wants it, but I'm gonna keep chugging along here. All right, so looking at labor market data, a few different things that students can use to help them decide if something is a good return on investment. And I'm going to go through these in an example in just a second, but employment projections. So is this job expected to have openings when they will be finishing college? If anyone was, trying to go into education in the early 2000s to 2010s, right? I don't know about you, but I had tons of people telling me, don't go into education. There's no jobs here. You'll have to go somewhere else. So looking not only at the national data, but also our state data to see, is that job going to be looking for people in this area or where you want to be? Looking at median wages, the regional demand, any required credentials, education level, skills, but a lot of times this can feel really confusing to students. We need to make sure that we're translating this for students. And I'm going to show you my favorite resource that really, I think, helps make it make sense for students, and emphasizing those local versus national variants. So some different tools that you can use for labor market data. The first is ONET and MyNextMove. ONET is one you might have heard about before. And it is a very comprehensive resource. I'll show it in just a second. MyNextMove is the same information. They are made by the same people, but it's a little bit simplified. So this is the one I really, really like to use with students because it just is a little bit easier to get through. You can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics website and their resource, the Occupational Outlook Handbook, very similar to ONET. You can look at the college scorecard, state and regional workforce reports. I'll show a couple of those in a second. And if you have an EDP tool, so Azzello, Naviance, SchoolLinks, Passable, whatever you use, any of those EDP tools will also give them information that is helpful. I'm actually going to open up a couple of these. So first I'm going to go to ONET. So again, I'm sure many of you have seen ONET before. And so, I'm just going to keep going with my nursing example. If I want to look up a nurse, it gives them tons of information. It tells them what the job titles for that would be. It tells them the tasks that they would do, the skills required. If you keep going down, it tells them what education level is required. So most require 4 years bachelor's, some do not. And then if they keep going down, they'll see the wage information. So they can select specifically for Michigan or wherever they want to be, and they can see what the median wage is. And then some of the jobs on ONET will have this like sun with bright outlook. That means that that job is expected to have a lot more openings in the next 10 years. So having great job growth. And so again, this can feel like a lot of information for a student. So usually what I like to do is go to My Next Move instead. Again, it is done by ONET. But as you see, if I look up nurse on here, it is just a little bit easier to digest for students. So again, tells them what that job does, the skills required, the education. And what I like is that I can even click find training. I can look in Michigan and I can see what type of training there is and how many recent graduates they had, which is really nice. And we can also look at that median salary. So it says this is a, has a bright outlook. So new jobs are very likely in the future. But then this is where we really want to make sure that they understand the national versus regional data. So the median salary for nurses nationally is 93,000. But then if we check out my state, it tells us that Michigan is pretty average. Whereas, let me give another example. If I look at like marine engineers. So again, same information, but if we go down here, it says it's very bright and, makes 105,000. But if we look at our state, we see that Michigan is actually below average, which makes sense since we are not, on the coast. So again, that's just important to understand for students that even if a job nationally is expected to grow, that doesn't mean it is in our area, or vice versa. There are some fields that are growing in Michigan that are not necessarily growing in other areas. So My Next Move is one of my favorite ones to use with students. When we are talking about state and regional data, Michigan releases this Hot 50 jobs list. And so currently this edition goes through 2032. They do it for 10 years at a time. And so this is for the state. And you can, if it loads, you can see which careers are high demand, high wage jobs in the state. It gives you some information about projected openings, the growth, the salary. And it's nice because it gives you options that are not just bachelor's degree required. It gives some with advanced degrees, some with on-the-job training, some that are just a high school diploma. So again, if students are just interested in seeing kind of like what is going to be in demand, they can look here as well. And then a lot of areas through your Michigan Works will have kind of a regional edition of that. So we can see this is for the whole state, but obviously we know that things look a little bit different from Detroit to Grand Rapids to Traverse City to, to somewhere in the UP. So looking at your regional data is also helpful. So for us here in West Michigan Works has a PDF, and they also have it broken down into kind of our biggest growing industries. And then we can click it and see, what areas are in demand. Again, the training, all of that same information. And then if you click on it, it actually takes you to the ONET description. So again, lots of different tools that students can use. But the one thing I really want to stress is that this information should be used to inform and not shut down students' hopes and dreams, right? If they have a goal and if they have something they want to go into, and maybe it's not growing super high in Michigan, yes, it might be a little bit harder for them to get employed. But that's something that they need to decide if that's a risk that they're willing to take, or kind of where they draw the line, what their outcome is that they're really looking for. So as we're talking to students, we really want to present this as, understanding your options, not discouraging them, but just having a full picture of what it looks like so that they don't finish a job and they're like, why didn't anyone tell me that there's no jobs in this area? So it's important to talk to students about what outcome they're looking for. So part of it is what I asked earlier, right? As we talk about like, what is your goal in pursuing post-secondary education or not pursuing? And from there, what debt feels manageable? Are they open to stacking credentials? We'll talk about this in our case study in just a second. But knowing that sometimes there are companies like for example, Corewell Health here in West Michigan. Corewell Health has a couple of apprenticeship programs that are only open to Corewell Health employees. So students have to start off, working in nutrition services or cleaning or something that might not seem super glamorous to them, but doing that for a year, 2 years, gives them an opportunity to apply for those apprenticeship programs as a surgical tech or a medical assistant or whatever it is that they want. We also know that there are employers that will pay for their schooling. So if they go and work there for a couple of years, they'll get an opportunity. Maybe it's in that specific field, maybe it's just any field they want to pursue. So again, it might take a little bit longer, but might be less expensive in the long run. So if that cost is really a value or important to them, that can be something to consider. We're seeing this a lot with students as we have the community college guarantee, right? A lot of students who in the past would have said, like, nope, I absolutely don't want to go to community college. I want that 4-year experience, are rethinking it a little bit because of the cost, right? So if they can go to a 2-year college for 2 years at low or no cost and, maybe get an associate's or, start working on it and then transfer to a 4-year. Again, it might take a little bit longer if, they have to, you know, take some additional classes or whatever, but it's going to be less expensive in the long run. And then some misconceptions we want to make sure that students understand. The first is that their major does not equal their job title. So again, there are a lot of employers that are hiring people who have a degree in some area. Obviously, there are some jobs that you have to have a specific degree. You cannot be a civil engineer if you do not have an engineering degree. You cannot be a teacher unless you've gone through some type of teacher prep program, right? But a lot of times, the specific major does not mean you have a specific job. We also need to remind them that their starting salary is not their lifetime salary. I do an activity a lot with students where I ask a series of questions and I ask them to sit down when they're no longer interested. And one of the early questions is like, your starting salary will be $45,000. And they immediately all sit down. And I'm like, oh, we might have to have a conversation because, again, starting salaries, unless you're in really high wage fields, is going to not be much higher than that, right? And so understanding that there's a difference between where they start and where their career could take them in terms of lifetime earning. And again, that degree level does not guarantee salary. So just because you have a bachelor's degree doesn't mean you're going to start off, higher than someone who doesn't have a bachelor's degree. You have to make sure that it is fitting with the path that you want to pursue. And you're not going just to get a degree and then for, not working in something that requires a degree and being underemployed. Another resource that I highly recommend students looking at is called First Destination Data. And so this is information that is required to be collected by all colleges and universities. And basically, they have to survey students at like a couple months and then up to 6 months out after graduation, and then try to figure out what are they doing post graduation. And so you want to look at first something called the knowledge rate. So the knowledge rate sometimes is a little misleading. They make it think you think that like all students have responded, but really this knowledge rate combines direct student responses, looking at social media. So did they update their LinkedIn? It uses National Student Clearinghouse data to see if they're enrolled in graduate school, and then also sometimes connections they might have had with professor or staff who then report it. So obviously, the higher the knowledge rate, the more accurate the data is. And in this data, you can usually filter it by major to see the percentage of students who are employed in grad school, still seeking, etc. So again, can be really helpful for students to figure out, one, not only is that field good for them, but also is that school the best place for them to go? So I have a couple of examples I want to pull up here. So I've got examples from Michigan State and Calvin just to show you. And literally, if you have them Google, like some people call it different things. They call it career outcomes, first destination, grad survey. If you just have them Google, first destination, it usually will come up. So this is from Michigan State. They have a really nice interactive dashboard that I like. Um, they can look at, past data. And again, I'm just going with my nursing example here, but they can, again, filter by major. And then we can see they unfortunately do not put the knowledge rate. But I do know personally that their knowledge rate is over 80%. So pretty good data. And so we can see that of those students who they got data on, 84% of them are employed full time. 7.5% of them were still seeking employment, 2.7 employed part-time, continuing education, 1.8 in military, and this tiny sliver seeking continuing education at 0.4%. On their website, you can also see their top employers. So it shows you different healthcare systems that their students are working at. Again, you can see some salary information. Helpful information just to see, does this major typically require an internship or co-op, or do students typically complete those? Shows where their students are employed, so most being in Michigan. And then for those who are continuing education, shows some of the schools that they're at and what type of degrees they're seeking after. So for those who are continuing education, um, some of them are going into additional nursing programs or like the PA program. And so you can see the breakdown here. Then if I look at, where did my Calvin one go? Okay, so Calvin, a little bit different. Theirs is a PDF. But again, here you can see that knowledge rate. So they have a 70.9% knowledge rate. So again, that's information that they received from 70% of their graduates. They have some general information, but they do also include information by major. So we can see that at Calvin, nursing is actually in their top 3 majors of all graduates. They had 61 nursing majors that graduated. And then they break it down by their schools. So we will look at School of Health. And we can see, so again, we just saw they had 61 nursing majors. They had 40 that responded, and all of them are employed. So again, pretty good information. But again, helpful for students who are maybe looking at something that's not as direct of a career path. Something a little bit more general, like a sociology, right? So we can see, okay, they had 4 that are employed and 2 that are continuing education. Good to know. But really good for them to see how many of them are actually still seeking or are working part-time, or, something that is not necessarily their desired outcome. So this can be really, really helpful for students. It's a hidden resource. Honestly, most college students don't even know it exists, but every school is required to collect it and report on it. So it should be available on their website somewhere, or they should be able to get it from the school. All right, I know this is a lot of text and I apologize, but in our last 10 minutes or so here, I have a little bit of a case study for us to examine. So this is assuming that you're working with a 10th grader who, I'm just going with my nursing example still, is considering nursing. And so we've really got kind of like 2 main options that I want you to think about for this student here. The first one being potentially lower cost. So doing things like attending their technical center, taking AP or dual enrollment credits, attending community college, or option 2, kind of that more typical, traditional, streamlined process where maybe they're getting some credits in high school and then they're just going to a 4-year program and getting, their BSN at a university. So I'm going to leave this up for a second, but really just know generally it's lower cost, kind of stacking credentials versus more streamlined. I'm going to send you into some breakout rooms again for you to be able to discuss how might you help this student decide which path is better for them. What additional information do you need from the student? What information might the student want to seek out, and how could they get that information? And ultimately, how could we help them decide which is the best option for them? I'll leave this up for just a second before I open some breakout rooms. Actually, let me see if I can just share. Okay, I think this should work for you to be able to view the PowerPoint. You should be able to click this link to look at that page if you need to, and that should still appear for you in your breakout rooms. Okay, and I'm actually going to put you in the same breakout rooms so that you've already got a little bit of chatting down with them. So I'm going to go ahead and open that for, let's see, let's do like 7 minutes. We have time to come back and debrief a little bit. But I will open those rooms. Again, that link is in the chat if you want to open up that slide. But again, we're just thinking about how would you help this student decide which route is the best way for them to approach this. Or if, going to college is the best investment for them at all. What additional information do you need from them, or do they need to collect? Okay, I'm gonna open that up now. All right, welcome back, everyone. I'd love to hear from a couple people. If anyone, you can come off mute and share. You can throw it in the chat. Any things that your group talked about that you would recommend this student consider, or some information that you or they might need to make the best choice for them. Wait just a second to see if, oh, yeah, definitely what kind of student they are. Are they dedicated to putting forth the effort? Obviously, there's a lot of information we don't know about the student that you, if you're a school counselor, would have in front of you for this student, right, in terms of their background. But are they dedicated to putting forth effort? Do they do well in science? Absolutely. Yes, I mean, especially for nursing, yes, there's definitely also a military option involved in this too. Definitely. Yep, financial need, how certain they are. Again, ideally, we would love for the student to have maybe done some job shadows or talk to people in the field to see, if this is exactly what they want to do. Absolutely. Yeah, some other things I had thought of, if a student chooses to take like dual enrollment, for example, in high school, and specifically ones that are needed for the degree, and they do poorly, it could affect their college GPA. And especially if they plan to continue at that institution, they may need to retake it to boost their overall GPA before being admitted. One thing about nursing programs, for the BSN programs, is a lot of schools have secondary admissions for nursing, which a lot of students don't realize. So most students do not just go straight from high school to nursing program. They have to do some classes first and then apply for the nursing program. Um, I looked at a few different schools in Michigan, and of course it depends on the school. Some have, nearly 100% acceptance rate, but at a place like Michigan State, it's about 40% that get admitted every year into the nursing program. And so then do they have a backup option? Are they going to keep trying? Again, that could extend their time to completion if they want to do that. Whereas most community colleges, you can pretty much get into their nursing programs right away. It's a little bit easier. Um, yeah, conversations with parents, understanding expectations and financial, definitely, for sure. Um, Along with that, kind of the difference between the community college and BSN, again, a lot of students who go to the community college, they're doing this program in 2 years. They have some classes that are fully online. It's a short program. Typically, again, they're not having to do a secondary admission to get into it. And so they can go, they get it, they take their the test at the end of the program, and they can start working. And sometimes those hospitals will actually then pay for them to go back and get their BSN if they need that to advance. So again, that idea of kind of stacking credentials, but could take longer, but be less expensive. Whereas, again, those BSN programs sometimes have competitive entry. They're not taking that test until the end of their 4 years. And then if they don't pass it, then what? Which is where sometimes that stacking credentials, even if it's getting a certificate in a CTE program, can be helpful because they might have something to kind of fall back on. So again, there's no like perfect answer for this. But again, just some things that you and students can think about as they're trying to decide, which one is the best option for me. Again, thinking about the cost piece. So are they willing to go to a 4 year, spend all that money and potentially not become a nurse if they don't pass it at the end and they don't have that fallback plan? Or are they okay with it taking a little bit longer, stacking those credentials, but maybe taking a little longer to get to their end goal? All right, sorry for going over here a minute, but that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, feel free. I'll hang out for a couple minutes, or you can always feel free to email me. I will send the copy of the recording and the PowerPoint with the links to all of the resources for you. I will throw that sketch code up one more, or the sketch link up one more time. Here's that link again for the sketches. And again, the code was 502. We have one more in this college prep series that is in March, I think. I should have looked at the date. And that one is going to be focusing on that question of, students ask, I want to go to college. Should I do AP classes? Should I do CTE? Should I do a dual enrollment? How do we help students decide which is the best path for them? So, kind of coming a little bit from this presentation, but diving deeper into those.